Welcome to Willie Church's Good Friday Reflection. Join us as we reflect on the journey of Jesus in the lead up to the cross. While the events can often seem sad, always remember, it is only the first part of the story. Good Friday is the first part, but Sunday is coming.
Jesus said that if I thirst, I should come to Him. No one else can satisfy. I should come to Him. Jesus said, if I am weak, I should come to Him. No one else can be my strength. I should come to Him. For the Lord is good and faithful. He will keep us day and night. We can always run to Jesus, Jesus strong and kind. Jesus said that if I fear, I should come to Him. No one else can be my shield. I should come to Him. For the Lord is good and faithful. He will keep us day and night. We can always run to Jesus, Jesus strong and kind. Jesus said, if I am lost, He will come to me. And He showed me on that cross, He will come to me. For the Lord is good and faithful. He will keep us day and night. We can always run to Jesus, Jesus strong and kind. For the Lord is good and faithful. He will keep us day and night. We can always run to Jesus, Jesus strong and kind. Jesus strong and kind.
On the first days of unleavened bread, the disciples came to Jesus and said, "Where do you want us to prepare your Passover meal?" He said, "Enter the city, Go up to a certain man and say, 'The teacher says my time is near. I and my disciples plan to celebrate the Passover meal at your house.'" The disciples followed Jesus' instructions to the letter and prepared the Passover meal. After sunset, he and the 12 were sitting around the table. During that meal, he said, "I have something hard but important to say to you. One of you is going to hand me over to the conspirators." They were stunned and then began to ask one after another, "It isn't me, is it, Master?" Jesus answered, "The one who hands me over is someone I eat with daily, one who passes me food at the table. In one sense, the Son of Man is entering into a way of treachery well marked by the Scriptures. In another sense, that man who turns him in turns traitor to the Son of Man. Better never to have been born than do this." Then Judas, already turned traitor, said, "Surely you don't mean me, Rabbi?" Jesus said, "You have said so."
Then Jesus told them, "Before the night's over, you're going to fall to pieces because of what happens to me. There is a scripture that says, 'I'll strike the shepherd, the sheep will be scattered.' But after I am raised up, I, your shepherd, will go ahead of you, leading the way to Galilee." Peter broke in, "Even if everyone else falls to pieces on account of you, I won't." "Don't be so sure," Jesus said. "This very night, before the rooster crows up the dawn, you will deny me 3 times. Peter protested, "Even if I had to die with you, I would never deny you." All the others said the same thing. Then Jesus went with them to a garden called Gethsemane and told his disciples, "Stay here while I go over there and pray." Taking along Peter and the 2 sons of Zebedee, he plunged into an agonizing sorrow. Then he said, "This sorrow is crushing my life out. Stay here and keep vigil with me." Going a little ahead, he fell on his face, praying, "My Father, if there is any way, get me out of this, but please, not what I want. What do you want?" When he came back to his disciples, he found them sound asleep. He said to Peter, "Can't you stick it out with me a single hour? Stay alert, be in prayer so you don't wander into temptation without even knowing you're in danger. There is a part of you that is eager, ready for anything in God. But there's another part that's as lazy as an old dog sleeping by the fire." He then left them a second time. Again he prayed, "My Father, if there is no other way than this, drinking this cup to the dregs, I'm ready. Do it your way." When he came back, he again found them sound asleep. They simply couldn't keep their eyes open. This time he let them sleep on and went back a 3rd time to pray, going over the same ground one last time. When he came back the next time, he said, "Are you going to sleep on and make a night of it? My time is up. The Son of Man is about to be handed over to the hands of sinners. Get up, let's get going. My betrayer is here."
Jesus climbs the hill to the garden still. His steps were heavy and slow. Love and a prayer took him there to the place only he could go. Gethsemane. Jesus loves me, so he went willingly to Gethsemane. He felt all that was said wicked or bad, was the pain we would ever know. While his friends were asleep, he thought to keep his promise made long ago. Gethsemane, Jesus loves me, so he went willingly to Gethsemane.
The words were barely out of his mouth when Jesus showed up, and with him a gang from the high priest and religious leaders brandishing swords and clubs. The betrayer had worked out a sign with them. The one I kissed, that's the one. Sees him, he went straight to Jesus, greeted him. How are you, Rabbi? And kissed him. Jesus said, friend, why this act? Then they came on him, grabbed him and roughened him up. One of those with Jesus pulled his sword and taking a swing at the chief priest's servant, cut off his ear. Jesus said, put your sword back where it belongs. All who use swords are destroyed by swords. Don't you realize that I am able right now to call my Father and 12 companies more? If I want them, of fighting angels would be here, battle ready. But if I did that, how would the scriptures come true that say this is the way it has to be? Then Jesus addressed the mob. What is this? Coming out after me with swords and clubs as if I was a dangerous criminal? Day after day I have been sitting in the temple teaching, and you never so much as lifted a hand against me. You have done it this way to confirm and fulfill the prophetic writings. Then all the disciples cut and ran. Matthew 26:47-56.
The gang that had seized Jesus led him before Caiaphas the chief priest, where the religious scholars and leaders had assembled. Peter followed at a safe distance until they got to the chief priest's courtyard. Then he slipped in and mingled with the servants, watching to see how things would turn out. The high priests, conspiring with the Jewish council, tried to make up charges against Jesus in order to sentence him to death. But even though many stepped up, making one false accusation after another, nothing was believable. Finally, two men came forward with this. He said, I can tear down this temple of God and after 3 days rebuild it. The chief priest stood up and said, What do you have to say to the accusation? Jesus kept silent. Then the chief priest said, I command you by the authority of the living God to say if you are the Messiah, the Son of God. Jesus replied, You yourself said it, and that's not all. Soon you'll see it for yourself, the Son of Man, seated at the right hand of the Mighty One, arriving on the clouds of heaven. At that, the chief priest lost his temper, ripping his robes, yelling, He blasphemed! Why do we need witnesses to accuse him? You all heard him blaspheme. Are you going to stand for such blasphemy? They all said, Death! That seals his death sentence. Then they were spitting in his face. They jeered as they slapped him. Prophecy, Messiah, who hit you that time? End of recording.
All this time, Peter was sitting out in the courtyard. One servant girl came up to him and said, You were with Jesus the Galilean. In front of everybody there, he denied it. I don't know what you're talking about. As he moved over toward the gate, someone else said to the people there, This man was with Jesus the Nazarene. Again he denied it, salting his denial with an oath. I swear I never laid eyes on the man. Shortly after that, some bystanders approached Peter. You've got to be one of them. Your accent gives you away. Then he got really nervous and swore, I don't know the man. Just then a rooster crowed. Peter remembered what Jesus had said, Before the rooster crows, you will deny me 3 times. He went out and he wept.
God's story, Peter denies Jesus. So remember how part of God's story is about a guy named Peter who walked on water with Jesus? Well, it goes like this. Peter followed Jesus, but like all of us, he wasn't perfect. Sometimes he messed up. One time, he even pretended not to know Jesus at all. Here's what happened. Jesus and his 12 disciples were going to different towns, showing more and more people that Jesus is God's son. But some people did not believe Jesus is God's son. They thought that was impossible. And they got so mad that Jesus said he was God's son that they tried to have him arrested, even killed. Turns out, Jesus had to die to rescue us. See, he was perfect, yet chose to come to our broken world and live and die just like us. But then he came back to life, which means Jesus really was sent from God and really is stronger than death. So now, even though we all mess up, we can follow Jesus and one day live with him forever. But at the time, Peter and the other disciples couldn't have known all that. They believed Jesus was God's son, but they didn't know how he would rescue us. One night, Jesus did get arrested. Peter and the disciples were sad and scared. They could get into trouble too, just for following him. So when a servant girl recognized Peter and said, "This man was with Jesus," Peter said, "I don't know him." Then someone else called Peter a follower of Jesus and he said, "I am not." A third person said Peter knew Jesus and Peter said, "I don't know what you're talking about." Right then, a rooster crowed and Peter realized what he had done. In fact, Jesus had told Peter that he was going to deny him 3 times before the rooster crowed. But guess what? That means Jesus knew Peter would mess up before he even did anything, and Jesus loved him anyway. The best part is, he feels the same way about us. Peter would keep on following Jesus and show many more people how to follow Jesus, and we can too. And that's part of the story of Peter. So, in case you missed it, here's the quick version. Peter messed up. People arrested Jesus. Peter pretended he didn't know Jesus. He did it again. He did it a 3rd time. The rooster crowed. Jesus still loved Peter. We mess up too. Jesus still loves us. Peter followed Jesus. We can follow Jesus too. And that's a part of God's story.
In the first light of dawn, all the high priests and religious leaders met and put the finishing touches on their plot to kill Jesus. Then they tied him up and paraded him to Pilate, the governor. Judas, the one who betrayed him, realized that Jesus was doomed. Overcome with remorse, he gave back the 30 silver coins to the high priests, saying, "I've sinned. I've betrayed an innocent man." They said, "What do we care? That's your problem." Judas threw the silver coins into the temple and left. Then he went out and hung himself. The high priests picked up the silver pieces, but then didn't know what to do with them. It wouldn't be right to give this a payment for a murder as an offering in the temple. They decided to get rid of it by buying the potter's field and use it as a burial place for the homeless. Then Jeremiah's words became history. They took the 30 silver pieces, the price of the one priced by some sons of Israel, and they purchased the potter's field, and so they unwittingly followed the divine instructions to the letter.
Jesus was placed before the governor, who questioned him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Jesus said, "If you say so." But when the accusations rained down from the high priests and religious leaders, he said nothing. Pilate asked him, "Do you hear that long list of accusations? Aren't you going to say anything?" Jesus kept silence, not a word from his mouth. The governor was impressed. It was an old custom during the feast for the governor to pardon a single prisoner named by the crowd. At the time, they had Barabbas in prison with the crowd before him. Pilate said, "Which prisoner do you want me to pardon, Jesus Barabbas or Jesus the so-called Christ?" For he knew that it was sheer spite that he had turned Jesus over to him.
While court was still in session, Pilate's wife sent him a message. Don't get mixed up in judging this noble man. I've just been through a long, troubled night because of a dream about him. Meanwhile, the high priests and religious leaders had talked to the crowd, asking for the pardon of Barabbas and the execution of Jesus. The governor asked, "Which of the two do you want me to pardon?" "Barabbas." "Then what do I do with Jesus, the so-called Christ?" They all shout, "Nail him to a cross." He objected, "But for what crime?" They all yelled the louder, "Nail him to the cross." When Pilate saw that he was getting nowhere, he took a basin of water and washed his hands in full sight of the crowd, saying, "I'm washing my hands of responsibility for this man's death. From now it's in your hands, your judge and jury." And the crowd answered, "We'll take the blame we and our children after us." Then he had Jesus whipped and then handed over for crucifixion.
The soldiers assigned to the governor took Jesus into the governor's palace and got the entire brigade together for some fun. They stripped him and dressed him in a red toga. They made a crown of thorns and set it on his head. They put a stick in his right hand for a sceptre. Then they knelt before him in mocking reverence. "Bravo, King of the Jews," they said. "Bravo!" Then they spat on him and hit him on the head with the stick. When they had had their fun, they took off the toga and put his own clothes back on him. Then they proceeded out to the crucifixion. Along the way they came to a man from Cyrene named Simon and made him carry Jesus' cross. Arriving at Golgotha, the place they call Skull Hill, they offered him a mild painkiller, a mixture of wine and myrrh. But when he tasted it, he wouldn't drink it. After they had finished nailing him to the cross and were waiting for him to die, they passed the time by throwing dice for his clothes. Above his head they had posted the criminal charge against him. "This is Jesus, the King of the Jews." Along with him, they also crucified two criminals, one to his right, the other to his left. People passing along the road jeered, shaking their heads in mock lament. "You bragged that you could tear down the temple and then rebuild it in 3 days. So show us what you've got. Save yourself. If you are really God's son, come down from that cross." He saved others, yet he cannot save himself. King of Israel, is he? He did claim to be God's son, didn't he? Even the two criminals crucified next to him joined in the mockery. From noon to 3, the whole earth was dark. Around mid-afternoon, Jesus groaned out of the depths, crying loudly, "Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani," which means, my God, why have you abandoned me?" Some bystanders who heard him said, "He's calling Elijah." One of them ran and got a sponge soaked in sour wine and lifted it on a stick so he could drink. The others joked, "Don't be in such a hurry. Let's see if Elijah comes and saves him." But Jesus, again crying out loudly, breathed his last. At that moment, the temple curtain was ripped in two, top to bottom. There was an earthquake, and rocks were split in pieces. What's more, tombs were opened up, and many bodies of believers asleep in their graves were raised. After Jesus' resurrection, they left the tombs, entered the holy city, and appeared to many. The captain of the guard and those with him, when they saw the earthquake and everything else that was happening, were scared to death. They said, "Surely he was the Son of God."
said that if I fear, I should come to him. No one else can be my shield. I should come to him.